One of the ideas in the Heartlands project, I guess, is to have this function of putting things on display, showing them to the public as part of your studio space, really. So to have some kind of large display window, I guess, at one side of the studio. How would that be for you?
I was offered a studio with that once and I turned it down because I didn't want people constantly looking in. I think that's great for designer makers. I think if you want to sell something, it's really good for people to be seeing how you're doing it, and it makes people interested because the process is interesting, and you don't often see a designer designing or a maker making what they make. But I think in the context of what I do, it would drive me mad. I think because a lot of the time people don't really understand what it is that you're doing, and you spend a lot of time explaining that. I went to art college for 4 years to learn that, and it's not something I want to explain to everybody as they come past, really. And also, you can't really focus if people are constantly... As this kind of pseudo workshop thing, works really well, I think. But in a fine art context, I wouldn't like it at all. And also because I sometimes do dance-based stuff, when you're kind of wearing strange things, doing odd movements, but you feel uncomfortable doing it yourself sometimes when you're working out a new language, and you don't necessarily want a lot of people looking as well until it's ready and you feel it's ready to go out. Also, because once you've made something, you get stuck with it in your mind and you want to move on from it as well. So
right. You want to get it out of your view, really.
Yeah, you want to get it and go back to it after a few weeks and see it again and think about it then, rather than holding on to it for that period of time.
So that's interesting. So if there would be, for instance, some kind of display really next to your studio, you would still see it every day when you enter the studio. That would still annoy you, or?
Well, I think if you had an option not to look at it. What I'm envisaging is you had your studio here, you'd have a big window here, and it would be kind of in the window, with no division in a way.
Yeah.
If there was a division where you could choose not to engage with it, that would work probably. And it is always good to get things seen. But then I think there's also a risk involved.
What's that?
In showing things informally, showing things which are in development as well. Because I think sometimes people don't understand that that's what's happening. Somebody that I know, someone can form a judgment on what you do and the quality of what you do, looking at something which isn't necessarily a resolved, developed piece of work. And I think there's a risk there in showing it in a formal setting. I did a little show in the project space, and I invited people to come and see it, and I promoted it very much as a drawing and as a work in progress. And in fact, it was a structure, and it was a video projection, but it was a drawing because it was working out ideas. It wasn't a finished piece, and because the project space was rough, that was fine, and it worked. And people came in and we talked about it, and it was brilliant. But if the project space had been a very new, clean, white space, I would have felt less comfortable doing that, because it would have given the opportunity for people who maybe weren't 100% engaged to think, oh, that's what she does, and then go away. Someone has just missed the bus and they haven't eaten yet, and they just popped their head round the door and seen it and gone, oh, that's rubbish, and gone off to have the rest of their day, and I think you'll be a bit wary of that thing happening sometimes. If you're making clothes, or you're making frames, or you're making ceramics, I think, like I say, I think the designer maker group probably get more out of a shop window style, open studio thing, where your studio is open most of the time and people can come in, I've heard people have been running their businesses much more successfully with that kind of setup, because people can see what they're doing, and it's a great hook to get people interested in what you do and encourage them to spend money. But if you're making things in a different context, which you may well be with a fine art practice, I think then that need for different sorts of spaces to engage people in different sorts of ways is important. Not necessarily within the disciplines within fine art, but I suppose in my mind setting that very differently from the designer-maker route.